Tonight on Primetime, Trump draws a red line for Oman, warning against interference in U.S. Iran talks. From allies to adversaries, what is really happening between Oman and the U.S.? Welcome to Prime Time. I'm James Zimoha. Now, Iran is warning of a tougher military stance as talks with the United States stall over the expired Islamabad memorandum and the future of the Strait of Hormuz. The warning comes as efforts to reach a lasting deal remain deadlocked between Tehran and Washington.
Iran says it will shift to a fully offensive military posture after efforts to negotiate a permanent end to the war with the United States stalled. A senior Iranian official told Reuters that Tehran would carry out a timely and precise military operation to break the U.S. naval blockade on Iran. The official said Washington must meet all provisions of the Islamabad-brokered Memorandum of Understanding within weeks before further negotiations can continue. The memorandum, signed by Iran and the United States in June, outlined a framework to end military operations and reach a final settlement. It expired on June 17th, with both sides accusing each other of failing to comply with its terms. Iran's foreign ministry says no talks have begun, although discussions on sanctions relief and nuclear issues could have been extended if no final deal was reached. Iran and Oman had agreed on a navigation route through the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran and Washington remain divided over control of the strategic waterway, with Iran claiming the right to manage the strait under the memorandum, a position rejected by Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump said his country was not seeking to extend the agreement, claiming Iran's military had been totally defeated and reiterating that Tehran would never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. Trump also criticized Oman over its role in talks on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, saying the country had not behaved very well, but that Washington could handle the situation easily. Meanwhile, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called for maximum use of diplomatic opportunities and said Ankara would continue supporting efforts aimed at achieving peace. During his phone call with Donald Trump, Erdogan added that the joint defense agreement signed with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia would contribute to regional stability and security.
Now, Tehran is tying any reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to what it says are outstanding U.S. commitments under the Islamabad Memorandum. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps also denies Donald Trump's claim that Washington is in contact with the group through a back channel.
The Islamic Revolution Guards Corps of Iran, IRGC, has warned that it will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz to maritime traffic as long as the U.S. does not carry out its obligations under the interim peace deal, which expired on Monday. IRGC's political deputy commander, General Yadullah Javani, in an interview with the state IRIB TV, also said that the so-called middle corridor at the strait, to be agreed between Iran and Oman, will be activated only after the war between Iran and the U.S. terminates. Meantime, the Revolutionary Guard's spokesman, Hossein Mohebbi, dismissed U.S. President Donald Trump's remarks regarding secret negotiations with IRGC officials about war, calling the statements, I quote, delusions born out of desperation and defeat. He added that even Iran's foreign ministry is not currently negotiating with the United States because of what he called Washington's breach of promises. Also, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai denied certain media reports about unofficial contacts between Washington and the IRGC via Iraqi Kurdistan officials and an alleged secret U.S. Iran meeting in Erbil. Speaking at a weekly press conference on Monday, he said the news was media techniques and psychological operation used to sow discord among Iran's decision-making bodies. Earlier, Fox News had reported that Trump confirmed there was a back channel for peace talks between Washington and the Revolutionary Guards. The Foreign Ministry spokesman also ruled out a 60-day deadline in the ceasefire agreement between Iran and the U.S. signed in June, saying the peace talks under the deal did not start because the U.S. resumed attacks and violated its provisions. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened military action against Oman over its efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In an interview with Fox News, Trump warned he could bomb Oman if its talks with Iran interfere with Washington's negotiations. The warning came hours after Tehran said it was close to a transit deal with Oman. The Strait of Hormuz has remained largely blocked for 6 months. All right, now let's bring in Peter Roth, Newsweek contributor, join us from Washington, D.C. Good to have you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, does Trump's latest threat against Oman signal a shift in strategy over the Strait of Hormuz?
No, I don't think it does. The idea here is, well, a secondary consideration that the strait needs to be open to ship from all nations. It needs to be freely transited in and out. And what the Iranians are apparently trying to do is bully the Omani into an agreement that Oman would be responsible for outbound traffic, and Iran would be responsible for inbound traffic, and that Iran would be the top dog and collect rents from ships using the Strait of Hormuz. That's not open. That's conditional on the whims of whoever happens to be in charge on any given day in Tehran. It is wholly unacceptable. And for the Omanis to go along with this is for the Omanis to join with Iran in their efforts to control the strait and expand Iranian influence in the Gulf.
Now, Oman and Iran have an understanding on managing navigation through the Hormuz. How much influence will that give them over the strait, and why is Washington so opposed to that arrangement?
Because Washington is opposed to that arrangement because ships from every nation who wish to use the Strait of Hormuz to transport goods into the Gulf region or take them out of the Gulf region should be allowed to use them, just like they use the straits on the other side of Saudi Arabia in and out of the Red Sea, just like the United States lets ships in and out of what President Trump now refers to as the Gulf of America. No bans, no barriers, no permissions, no restrictions. Iran wants to use traffic in the Strait of Hormuz to enrich itself by extorting rents from shippers and to increase its power over the other Gulf states that rely on the strait to move oil, liquefied natural gas, fertilizer, and other products out, and to import the things that they need that they can't make where they are.
Now, Oman has been one of Washington's key channels to Tehran. Why would Trump then risk putting pressure on them?
Because Iran is putting pressure on Oman. Iran is extorting cooperation from Oman, saying, let's take joint control of the strait. Good for you, good for me. I doubt that lasts 6 months if it's successful. The president has been forced to counter pressure Oman to understand that they cannot join with Iran on this effort without being exposed to potential consequences.
All right. Now, Senator Tim Kaine is preparing a resolution to block strikes on Oman without congressional approval. Could that become a real constraint for Trump or on Trump's ability to escalate the war?
It's doubtful that Senator Kaine can get enough of his colleagues to go along with him. Despite having been Hillary Clinton's ticket mate in 2016, he's not viewed with great respect, admiration, or seen as a leader in the U.S. Senate. He's seen as a bit of a fringy gadfly on the hard left end of the party, even though he represents Virginia, which has a reputation for being a moderate state. If this were taken up by a senator who was a serious person, it would be a bigger threat. But I don't think that this effort will be any more successful than Senator Kaine's previous efforts to invoke the War Powers Act to stop the U.S. efforts to eradicate the Iranian nuclear program.
Now, if this confrontation escalates, could it make the restoration of normal shipping through Hormuz harder rather than easier and turn the strait into an even bigger bargaining weapon?
Well, I think we can guarantee that the conflict is going to escalate. As your reporter told us from Tehran, Iran is preparing to shift to an offensive strategy. What does that mean? That means they're going to launch attacks on the United States, on U.S. interests, and if their behavior continues as it has, on facilities that are uniquely the property of the Gulf states, like the desalinization plant in Kuwait that they bombed, or the LNG facility in Qatar that they attacked, or the UAE facilities that they attacked, not in retaliation, but on offense. So if Iran is preparing to reignite the war, we can anticipate that things will get more difficult. That will complicate negotiations, but it also, in a way, increases the freedom of action of the United States. We have been, the Trump administration has been restrained up to this point, depending on economics, to create a situation in which the regime in Tehran cannot survive. Uh, Popular unrest is growing, but it has not reached the tipping point. If Iran goes on the march and attacks not only U.S. interests, but the interests of our allies and friends in the Gulf, then we can almost predict that at least a couple of the Gulf states may join the United States in responding and may not show the same kind of restraint that the U.S. has shown, trying to confine all U.S. strikes to targets that have some kind of strategic or military significance and are not civilian in nature.
All right, now, could Tehran now use the pressure on Oman to strengthen its own bargaining position over Hormuz?
I think it could. I think it is. I think it will. But as I said, I don't expect any agreement to jointly operate the Strait of Hormuz between Iran and Oman to last long enough to let the ink dry. I think the Omanis will find themselves pushed out rather quickly. This is the nature of the Iranian regime. They are not to be trusted. They could not fulfill even the most basic requirement under the MOU, which was to remove the mines and reopen the strait. They refused international help to clear the mine, and they attacked commercial shipping as it moved through the strait. This was a step one promise that was met by the promise was met by an end of the U.S. naval blockade until it became clear that Iran had no intention of reopening the strait except under its own terms, which is open under our control, meaning you don't get through if we don't want you to get through. That's not a workable situation for 99.9% of the countries on planet Earth that rely on ocean-going vessels to supply them with energy or to ship out their own wares. The only country that works for really is, well, Iran.
All right, thank you. That was Peter Roth, Newsweek contributor, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
All right, now coming up, we'll examine the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on the wider region as Uzbekistan reports uncertainty over trade and transport links. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Primetime. Now, businesses in Uzbekistan are facing fresh risks as the Middle East conflict disrupts key trade and transport routes. The uncertainty is also putting pressure on supply chains and raising concerns over the wider impact on the country's economy. Severa Japova has more from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan estimates that disruptions to trade routes through Iran caused by conflict in the Middle East could cost its economy between $1 and $1.5 billion. According to the country's fiscal strategy for 2027 to 2029, the potential losses would be equivalent to around 0.7 to 1% of Uzbekistan's GDP. The risks stem from Uzbekistan's reliance on Iranian territory as a transit route for international trade. In 2025, goods worth around $3.9 billion were imported through Iran, about 9% of Uzbekistan's total imports. That included around $1 billion worth of technological equipment, as well as food, chemicals, metals, vehicles, and pharmaceutical products. Uzbekistan also exported around $1.4 billion worth of goods to Iran, excluding gold. Textiles accounted for more than $546 million, while metals and metal products made up another $422 million. Officials warned that prolonged disruptions could increase transport costs, extend delivery times, and put additional pressure on supply chains. Higher global prices for oil, food, and fertilizers could add further inflationary pressure. At the same time, Uzbekistan is continuing to expand economic ties with Iran. Bilateral trade rose by almost 38% in the first half of 2026, reaching $305 million, while the two countries are discussing 29 joint projects. The figure suggests that while Uzbekistan's direct economic dependence on Iran is limited, disruptions to Iranian transit routes could have a significant impact, highlighting the need for alternative trade corridors as Tashkent seeks to strengthen its economic reliance. Cyril Vajap reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
All right, joining us now is Firdavs Kobilov, Deputy Dean for Scientific and International Cooperation at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy. Join us from Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Good to have you, sir.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're welcome now, sir. Uzbekistan estimates the Middle East tension could cost up to $1.5 billion. Is this mainly a Uzbekistan problem or a warning of wider risks for Central Asia?
Indeed, the tension in the Middle East already caused significant political, economic, and social impact, not only in the region itself, but also on the world, and especially Central Asia, which is located in Eurasia, experiencing already the bad consequences of this tension. So Iran plays a key role as a gateway to international markets, and also it's a transit route for Central Asian countries, especially for Uzbekistan. And this tension in the Middle East caused a lot of disruptions in transport routes, which connects Central Asia, especially Uzbekistan, with sea routes, global sea routes.
Thank you. Now, Uzbekistan relies heavily on trade routes through Iran. How vulnerable does that make the country when conflict disrupts one of its key links to global markets?
Iranian port serves important transport hubs for Uzbekistan's cargo bonds. Impacts of this disruption cause a lot of challenges for Uzbekistan, especially today Uzbekistan's foreign policy represents a more economic-oriented approach, which focuses on increasing of the mutual trade, development of the tourism, attracting a lot of foreign direct investment, and plus Uzbekistan tries to reach a global transport links and reach global markets by increasing its export. And that Iran and Iranian ports plays a crucial role for this foreign policy approach of Uzbekistan. And today, in general, Central Asian countries are spending, um, in comparison with the other regions, more transport costs for exporting their goods. If in the global it is 11 percentage of the cost of the goods, countries facing 50 percentage of the cost of this transportation. That's why for Uzbekistan, of course, it plays a crucial role.
Now, if energy and transport costs stay high, how quickly could the effects show up in food prices and cost of living across Central Asia?
Yeah, exactly. The government also expects the increase of the oil plus other additional goods, including the food, mineral fertilizers, and other things. And of course, uh, is a crucial transit route for Uzbekistan in general, for Central Asian countries. And the disruption of these transport routes it plays can significantly increase the prices for all the goods imported or exported from Central Asia or to Central Asia. That's why here the for domestic economy, it could increase inflationary pressure on Uzbekistan's broader macroeconomic indicators. Um, in general, we can say that in that case, especially uh, ongoing Ukraine-Russian war also uh, puts additional pressure on Central Asian countries, and the alternative way is looking for middle corridor.
Now, could this crisis push Uzbekistan and its neighbors to move faster on alternative routes across the Caspian and through the Middle Corridor?
I assume yes, and it's already ongoing because, for example, the participation of the Azerbaijan in the consultative meeting of the heads of the Central Asian countries, and it's already the second time Azerbaijan is participating in these consultative meetings. It's already signaled that Central Asian countries are looking for alternative transport routes, and one of the obvious alternative transport routes is middle or through Caucasus. And Azerbaijan was invited for this consultative meeting, probably to discuss these transport issues and energy issues. That's why I think this is already going process.
Now, I wanted to ask you about that, but I'm glad you touched upon it. Could Azerbaijan become even more important to Central Asia if the southern routes through Iran remain unreliable?
Definitely, Azerbaijan is already a very important key player for Central Asian countries, but the significance of the Azerbaijan is increasing daily because of the fact that the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and Ukraine and Russian war as well. And also when we hear from the President Donald Trump that there is no any scheduled negotiation processes with Iran, and it signals that the conflict will prolong it, no any peace talks. The middle corridor is becoming very significant, and Azerbaijan plays a crucial role for Central Asian countries. And also, on the framework of the Turkic world, Azerbaijan and Central Asian countries used to have very like historical ties, and today these ties also uh, somehow by economic needs mm, of the modern reality.
Now, Central Asia has been building closer economic ties with the Gulf. Could prolonged instability in the Middle East put pressure on those investment plans?
Yes, for Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan has limited but still significant mutual trade turnover with the Middle Eastern countries. And also, there are a lot of significant, very important investment projects. This prolonged tension between Iran and the U.S. can, of course, challenge these projects. But still, there is like a positive change because Uzbekistan's foreign policy, which is nowadays showing pragmatic and more open foreign policy, and the liberalization of the domestic economy, plus Uzbekistan like supporting the different types of the transport corridors and improving relations with Central Asian countries. I think it opens new opportunities for external actors invest in Uzbekistan. But in general, the external environment it's not stable. The economic political situation can be disrupted because of these ongoing tensions in general.
Now, there's also a possible upside for some countries. Could higher energy and gold prices and stronger demand for alternative routes create opportunities for Central Asia despite the wider risks? Please briefly.
Yes, oil price is already somehow managed because of the preparation of the world, like different countries for this. But one interesting fact about the gold, this conflict somehow played such a positive role for export of the gold for Uzbekistan because during the conflict the price of the gold was higher and demand for the gold import was also higher. So this is one of the beneficial sides for Uzbekistan economy that the gold prices are increasing and export also increasing in Uzbekistan.
All right, thank you. That was Firdavs Kobelov, Deputy Dean for Scientific and International Cooperation at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy. Join us from Tashkent. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now, Belgium is battling its biggest wildfire on record, with around 3,000 hectares of land destroyed in the east of the country. However, sudden cooler temperatures are helping firefighters contain the blazes. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where rain and cooler temperatures finally help firefighters gain ground against the biggest wildfire ever recorded in Belgium. The blaze has burned around 3,000 hectares of the High Fence Nature Reserve in eastern Belgium since Friday, following intense heat that pushed temperatures as high as 37 degrees Celsius. Approximately 500 firefighters from Belgium, Germany, and Luxembourg, backed by the military, farmers, and international crews, have been battling the flames, with aircraft also deployed through the EU's emergency response system. And there are now signs the situation is improving. Belgian officials say parts of the blaze have been contained and the fire is no longer spreading towards the German border. But authorities say they cannot yet declare the overall fire contained. The biggest challenge may now be underground, where fire is smoldering deep in the high fence peat bogs and could burn for months. What started the blaze remains unclear. Human activity is responsible for roughly 90% of wildfires, whether through campfires, discarded cigarettes, or other causes. And Belgian prosecutors are now investigating how this fire began. It comes after Europe experienced its worst wildfire season on record last year, when more than 1 million hectares burned. This year is already breaking records in some countries, including France, with the traditional fire season still weeks from ending. Frustration boiled over Monday in the southwestern French village of Le Porge, where hundreds of homes were destroyed by a massive wildfire last month. Residents booed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu, accusing authorities of doing too little while protecting wealthier communities. As the fire spread, so too does the political anger, it seems. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, Georgia's government is pushing back against EU demands over controversial laws as tensions with Brussels continue to grow. Prime Minister Irakli Kopakidze says the bloc is using political and economic pressure against Tbilisi. Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Prime Minister Irakli Kopakidze has defended Georgia's policies amid continued tensions with the European Union, including over legislation on foreign influence and so-called family values and child protection. Speaking at a government briefing, Kopakidze said that the EU had formally called on Georgia to repeal its foreign influence transparency law. The legislation, which requires certain organizations receiving significant foreign funding to register and disclose their finances, sparked mass protests in Tbilisi and has been widely criticized by civil society groups as the Russian law. Kopakidze rejected that description, saying the legislation was based on the United States Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. He also defended the government's family values and child protection legislation, saying the laws were intended to protect Georgia's national identity and sovereignty. The Prime Minister also said Brussels was urging Georgia to align with EU sanctions against Russia. Georgia has not joined the sanctions regime, and Kopakidze argued that doing so could have serious economic consequences for the country. He further accused the EU of linking visa-free travel for Georgian citizens to political conditions, describing the approach as pressure on Tbilisi. Kopakidze said countries ultimately pursue policies they believe serve their national interests and argued that this applies equally to the EU and the United States. The Prime Minister also criticized the previous U.S. administration, accusing it of putting pressure on Georgia over issues including sovereignty and governance. Washington and Brussels have repeatedly raised concerns over what they describe as democratic backsliding in Georgia. There is currently no clear indication of a broader political reset between Tbilisi and its Western partners, with disagreements continuing over Georgia's domestic legislation, foreign policy, and democratic trajectory. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Now, Russia's Supreme Court has upheld a ruling against the opposition Yabloko party, barring its candidates from September's parliamentary election. The vote will also decide regional officials, with President Vladimir Putin of Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party expected to retain its dominance. Dasha Shanishova has more from Moscow.
Russia's Supreme Court rejected an appeal by the country's liberal Yabloko party, thus upholding a decision to cancel the registration of its federal slate of candidates for the September State Duma elections. Earlier this month, the Supreme Court disqualified Yabloko from parliamentary elections after a case against it was brought by the Rodina party, which accused Yabloko of infringing copyright with its election campaign materials. Rodina also made the claim that Yabloko had engaged in extremist activities and had received illegal financing from abroad. Yabloko chairman Nikolai Rybakov slammed the decision, saying it was, quote, merely in imitation of a court proceeding, and adding that the court made no attempt to examine the substance of the case. Rybakov said Yabloko was preparing for a plan B for Russians who, in his words, support the party's pro-peace platform. This ruling is now final and removes Russia's oldest liberal party from the nationwide party list ballot. Yabloko candidates can still run in single-member districts, but securing a parliamentary seat through these races is much more challenging. Scheduled to take place between the 18th and the 20th of September, the elections will determine the makeup of the State Duma, Russia's lower chamber, with all 450 seats up for grabs. The upcoming parliamentary vote is largely seen to have a predetermined result, but are also expected to give the insight into Russia's public opinion and the Kremlin's vision for the country's future. Dasha Chernyshova for A News in Moscow.
Now, Kyrgyzstan is turning to new fuel suppliers as it looks to cut its reliance on Russia. China is now a key focus, with talks underway with energy giant Sinopec on regular fuel deliveries. Bishkek has also started bringing in fuel from several other countries. Fraza Kalamaziner has more.
Kyrgyzstan is looking to increase fuel imports from China as Bishkek moves to diversify its energy supplies and reduce its heavy reliance on Russia. Officials are now discussing that possibility with Sinopec, one of China's largest energy companies. The talks took place in Urumqi in western China and involved executives from more than 10 Kyrgyz oil companies. And these discussions are already focused on the practical side of potential supplies, including volumes and transport routes, customs procedures and commercial terms. The aim is to establish direct links between Sinopec and Kyrgyz fuel companies and explore how regular deliveries could work. Kyrgyz and Chinese officials have also agreed to simplify and speed up the process of bringing fuel across the border. The wider context here is important. Kyrgyzstan consumes around 2 million tons of fuel every year, and roughly 95% of that has traditionally come from Russia. Now Bishkek is trying to change that balance. Fuel is already coming in from Belarus, Azerbaijan and Turkey, with Kazakhstan and China also being considered as additional suppliers. The first shipment of fuel from China has already reached Kyrgyzstan, and Bishkek has also moved to protect supplies at home, imposing an indefinite ban on exports of gasoline, diesel and oil. Fariza Kalimurzina, Kostanay, A-News.
Now, Afghanistan is looking to Russia for help with its power network, with the national utility discussing assessments of major power plants with Russia's power machines. The talks could pave the way for work on the country's aging energy system. Tamim Bahis reports.
The Afghanistan Preshna Shirkat, or DABS Chief Executive Abdul Haq Hamkar, has held talks with a technical delegation from Russia's Power Machines company. The Russian delegation presented its initial assessments of a number of existing power generation facilities, including Mahipur and Parwan. According to DABS, the assessments identified the need to increase generation capacity at some plants, make technical modifications, modernize equipment, and carry out more comprehensive studies. DABS Chief Executive said conditions are now in place for investment in Afghanistan's power generation and infrastructure upgrades. He said Power Machines could consider investment once the required preliminary technical stages are completed. DABS also says that during approximately the past 5 years, efforts have been made to attract foreign investment for the rehabilitation of existing power plants. For now, these discussions remain at the technical assessment stage, with further studies expected to determine the scope of possible rehabilitation and investment. Tamim Bahis, Kabul, A-News.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. Stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Now, Moscow is warning London over British-made drones used in Ukrainian strikes inside Russia, raising tensions between the two countries. The Russian embassy in London said Britain would have to answer for its support for Ukraine. The UK Defence Ministry said it stands shoulder to shoulder with Kyiv and will keep supplying equipment. The warnings come as Ukraine steps up long-range drone strikes on Russian military and energy targets. A major Wildberries warehouse near Moscow has again come under attack by Ukrainian drones, raising questions over why the retailer has become a target. Ukraine says its strikes are aimed at disrupting Russia's military supply and logistics network. But what links the company's facilities to that effort?
Ukraine is taking aim at one of Russia's biggest commercial networks and says it has a military role. Kyiv accuses Wildberries of handling dual-use goods and military-related equipment, including drone components and other technical products. Ukraine says disrupting the company's logistics network can interfere with supplies supporting Russia's war effort. Those claims have not been independently verified. Wildberries and Russian authorities reject them. Wildberries is Russia's largest online retailer. It says it processes around 20 million orders every day, with warehouses covering about 3 million square meters. Its network connects hundreds of thousands of sellers with consumers across Russia. Since the 18th of July, more than 20 Wildberries warehouses have been targeted across Russia, with attacks reaching as far east as Yekaterinburg, more than 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. A major strike on the 3rd of August caused a fire covering around 100,000 square meters at a Wildberries warehouse in the Vladimir region. More than 200 firefighters were deployed, while deliveries were redirected. Reuters reported that nearly 30% of the company's warehouse space had been destroyed, with losses estimated at between $2 and $4 billion. The Associated Press later reported estimates as high as $6 billion. The disruption has also put pressure on businesses and lenders. Russia's central bank has asked banks to help restructure loans for small and medium-sized businesses affected by attacks on logistics centres. Wildberries is now reorganising its logistics network and using alternative facilities to keep deliveries moving.
Now, the losses from Colombia's powerful earthquake last week have been put at a 30 trillion pesos, that's around $9.6 billion. Colombia's president said the losses mainly affected buildings and vital infrastructure. The 7.4 magnitude quake struck western Colombia a week ago, killing at least 280 people, injuring more than 4,000, with others still missing. Buildings were brought down in several areas in the cities of Cali and Pereira. The scale of the damage is still being assessed as rescue and recovery efforts continue.
There's already an initial technical estimate of the economic impact of this entire disaster. A private firm estimated direct property damage in Choco, Valle del Cauca, Risaralda, Quindio and Caldas at nearly 30 trillion pesos, approximately 24.5 trillion in buildings and 5.5 trillion in infrastructure. Just imagine the scale of the disaster.
Now, China is bracing for a possible record-setting El Nino, with Pacific waters expected to keep warming in the months ahead. The warning comes as the country faces a summer marked by floods, landslides and typhoons.
China's National Climate Center says the emerging El Nino could become the strongest ever recorded. Sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern equatorial Pacific are expected to rise steadily, peaking around November and December. The Climate Center says China has already seen the effects of the phenomenon since the start of summer, including torrential rain in several regions. Rain belts have sometimes overlapped, compounding disasters, while typhoons have been strong and active, bringing prolonged winds and rainfall. Last week, Typhoon Dolphin, the strongest typhoon to hit the country this year, unleashed extreme rain across eastern, central and northern regions. The government says natural disasters in July left more than 300 people dead or missing and incurred around $8.5 billion in direct economic losses. The forecast comes as China deals with a series of deadly weather-related disasters. Last month, flash floods triggered landslides in northwestern Gansu province, killing 25 people. Another landslide in Chongqing left 51 dead after a mountain collapsed. President Xi Jinping has called for stronger disaster prevention, monitoring and early warning systems, as well as efforts to address gaps in flood control and drainage infrastructure. The United Nations Weather Agency has also raised its forecast for a strong El Nino in the coming months, warning the phenomenon is likely to drive global temperatures higher.
Now, nearly 500 people have been evacuated to safety in Costa Rica due to heavy rainfall. The country's National Emergency Commission says overflowing rivers have cut off whole communities. Rescue teams helped residents move to shelters in Cartago, Limon and Saripiqui after tropical wave number 32 brought torrential downpours over the weekend. Local flooding is reported along with road closures and disruptions to public services, mainly in northern areas along the Caribbean coast. Now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has urged Donald Trump to pursue talks with Iran offering Ankara's support for efforts to ease tensions between Washington and Tehran. In a phone call, Erdogan also discussed Gaza and the defense pact between Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. He said the deal showed a strong commitment to regional security. Erdogan has also pledged continued support for concrete steps to rebuild Gaza. Now, oil markets are moving higher as uncertainty over the Middle East conflict keeps investors on edge. The latest move comes as traders assess the wider impact of events in the Gulf on oil prices and financial markets.
Oil prices moved higher on Tuesday as hopes of a U.S. Iran peace deal weakened, raising concerns over possible disruptions to global energy supplies. Brent crude rose 27 cents, or 0.3%, to around $91 a barrel after reaching its highest level since late July in the previous session. The uncertainty also weighed on U.S. markets. Wall Street's three main indexes ended lower on Monday. The S&P 500 fell 0.5%. The Dow Jones lost around 0.5%, while the Nasdaq dropped 0.3%. Progress towards peace talks and the resumption of oil tanker traffic through the strategically important Strait of Hormuz has slowed. Only 5 commodity vessels transited the strait on Saturday after attacks on tankers, and there were none registered for Sunday versus 31 in the prior weekend. That's according to ship tracking data from Kepler showed. But any prolonged disruption could put further pressure on oil supplies and prices.
All right, it's been a pleasure bringing you Primetime tonight. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.